Okay, everyone. This is the way we're going to do this one. I'm not in love with it, but it's a way to go because I really want to get into World War One. And remember, I talked about the 20th century was like the Titanic. Well, here you see the iceberg that sunk the Titanic. At least it's believed to be. And we want to talk about the iceberg that sinks the 20th century, and that's the First World War. And many ways, World War One is the first modern war. It's seen through the use of chemical warfare, including the terrible mustard gas, fully automatic weapons, machine guns that could fire hundreds of bullets a minute, airplanes, submarines or U-boats, massive trench warfare, barbed wire, Gatling guns. Indeed, 800, and we're talking about mustard gas, 800,000 casualties from the gas. Here you can see just these massive guns being fired that would nothing like had been seen in warfare before then. Living in these trenches in absolute terror, like I said, mustard gas being used quite common, which often lead to just horrific effects on the body, lungs being destroyed, blindness often following. This absolute carnage of the battlefield. Some of the first tanks were used. They weren't very effective at first. They would often get stuck in the mud, but they were using tanks for the first time. Here you can see a German submarine, as well as air fighting. Air Force will be used for the first time. There is Manfred von Richthofen of Germany, who is known as the Red Baron. To become an ace pilot, you have to shoot down 5 enemy planes. For Germany, you had to shoot down 10 enemy planes. He shot down over 80 enemy planes. When he dies, he was struck by fire himself, but he was able to land his plane before he died. And he was given a full military funeral by the British. He was so respected as an aviator. You can see here the use of flamethrowers and other modern weapons. World War I was the first modern war. It's also the first modern war because all those isms we've been looking at come together. This is the industrialism war. This is the nationalism war, a war of imperialism. And it's also the first total war, where that line between civilian and soldier is just gone. It is just a horrific war. But it's also one that is fairly forgotten, sad to say, for being such a big one, especially compared to World War II, at least in the United States. I think that comes, there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe the fact that World War II just kind of overshadows it. But World War I is so important. It's fascinating. But I think it's a forgotten war because, and one way to think about it is, remember we talked about Greek dramas way back at the beginning of this semester. Well, in many ways, you could say a Greek drama played out here. There's morality plays. Morality plays are where you have your hero and your villain, good versus bad, virtue versus sin, and the hero wins. And in some ways, World War II kind of fits a little more nicely into that. U.S. versus Nazism, freedom versus tyranny. The other type of Greek story is a tragedy, and those aren't as popular, at least in American audiences, right? Tragedy is where there's no winner or loser. There's no good guy or bad guy. It's just you have decent people with tragic flaws, and it just all comes crashing down. And that, think about the United States. The movie Avengers Infinity War would not have worked if there was not going to be an Avengers Endgame to make it okay. Well, World War I is just a tragedy. It's a sad tragedy from literally the way it starts to the literal minute it ends, and we'll talk about that later. But it shouldn't be forgotten. As you can see on this map, if the country is bold and if it's in dark, if it's in black, that country was involved in World War I in one way, shape, or form. It's a massive war effort. So let's talk about the causes of World War I. That's what I at least want to talk about today is the causes and beginning of World War I. Now, when it comes to any historical event, especially a war, there are 2 types of causes. The first type of cause is what we call the underlying causes, the things that lead up to it. And think of the underlying causes as like a barrel of gunpowder. In and of itself, it's not dangerous per se, but there's potential for danger. All it takes is a flame. And that's the immediate cause. The immediate cause is the match that lights it. So starting with the gun barrel, what are the immediate causes of World War I? Well, there are a lot. First, the fact that Europe was getting a little more unstable. Germany was getting more powerful, and once again, this goes back to what we talked about way at the beginning of this year with ancient Greece, right? Athens got more powerful. That made Spartans scared. Same thing. Germany was getting more powerful, that made England scared. So you had this instability. You had so many superpowers that could kind of compete with each other. You had more industrialism. The fact that war will be this massive because you have this industrialized scale of weaponry being mass produced. You have large militarism as the countries are getting bigger and bigger in their national defenses. You've got more rivalries in the Navy. The armies have gotten bigger. You have competition for markets. Plus, you have a very complex alliance system, including some secret alliances. So all of a sudden, you aren't going to war with one country, you're going to war with a lot. It's also a time of nationalism, as many countries want to, or many people groups want to rule themselves. And this might sound surprising, but honestly, boredom. In some ways, World War I might be the result of boredom. Europe hadn't really gone to war in 100 years, not since the time of Napoleon. There were minor wars, but in some ways, not since Napoleon. But as we look through here, you can see there's the colonial markets being competition. We talked about Africa and in Asia before. Here you can see the rise in defense spending and how it's just started to expand. The total, all of a sudden, the 94 million British pounds that was spent in 1870, by 1914, they're spending almost 4 times as much. All right, let's skip through some of these. So overall, there's just a sense of worry. By the summer of 1914, there really was this concern among the European powers of what could happen. Here you can see some of the major players. And this brings us to the powder keg of Europe, as it's called, which is Southeast Europe, where, and I get this quotation from a historian, most governments were well run, their nation states were relatively well off, once again, they're doing good, yet just beneath the surface, tensions boiled, ready to erupt explosively. And that's where it's going to happen here in the Balkans, known as the powder keg of Europe. Which brings us to the immediate cause of the match. This is Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Not a popular man. His father didn't like him either, but he wasn't a super popular man. But he was in Sarajevo, where Bosnia, which was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And there was a group known as the Black Hand, and he was on their assassination target list. They had actually attempted to assassinate him that day. It did not go well. Well, he goes to his meeting. He actually wants to visit the hospital where the people who were injured in the assassination attempt. While his driver is driving him, he makes a wrong turn. Yes, what's going to happen next in all of history, both World War I and beyond, pretty much everything up to this point, is a result of some ways of a wrong turn. Driver makes a wrong turn. A young 20-year-old, I don't even think he was 20. I think he was like 19-year-old named Princip runs up, shoots him, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and they are killed. He's too young to be sentenced to death. He's sentenced to 20 years. He dies of tuberculosis a few years later. All of these possible assassins actually all had tuberculosis. They had nothing to live for, in essence. So that happens on June 28th, 1914. So Austria makes a list of demands to Serbia to resolve it. Serbia meets most of them, except it can't meet all of them. Pretty much the idea is we will let you investigate, we will let you determine what happened, but we can't stop the terrorist underlying feelings. We'll try to put an end to it, but we can't stop the people from wanting to have their independence, which was enough. And so on July 28th, 1914, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And this is where the war becomes tragic. And it's this whole mishigas. July 28th, Austria declares war on Serbia. July 29th, Russia mobilizes to defend Serbia because Russia was defending Serbia, the similar people groups. So Germany backs up Austria, which it said it would, and therefore Germany declares war on Russia. Well, Russia and France had a treaty, so now France is at war with Germany. Well, Germany therefore had a plan to invade France, and so it invades Belgium to get to France. Well, Great Britain comes to the defense of Belgium. Soon after, you've got others joining in. You have Turkey or the Ottoman Empire joins in with the German-Austrian alliance. Italy joins in, then it backs out and joins the other side. Japan eventually gets involved. Meanwhile, for most of the war, the United States is sitting off chewing bubblegum. Eventually, the United States gets involved, and you can see all these major countries that will be involved in the war effort. All because of a wrong turn in many ways. And so you can see the soldiers get moved up, and here we have what's called the Schlieffen Plan, where invades France. It was part of their two-front battle to knock France out of the war and focus on Russia. They had to invade Belgium in the process. Britain comes to Belgium's aid. Results in the two fronts. There's the Eastern Front, which is along the Russian-German, on this side of Europe, and then the Western Front. And immediately this war turns into something no one saw. Everyone thought the war would be over in a few months. Hardly. It turns immediately into a carnage and stalemate. At the Battle of Verdun, 315,000 French are killed, 280,000 German casualties. Of all those, less than 160,000 bodies are recovered. At the Battle of the Somme, the British only gain a few thousand yards. They lose 420,000 people. It is a complete disaster of a war where there is very little fighting done, there's very little gain done as they die in these trenches and the fighting in no man's land. It is a horrific, horrific time. For those who aren't dying, those who are surviving, life in the trenches is, of course, terrible. These trenches are crowded, they're wet, when it rains, it's filled with water. It is a horrible thing. This war of 40 days turns into a bloody stalemate, and 1 million people are dead before the year is out. Would love to go in more detail on the Western Front. Don't have really time at the moment. Here you can see everyone's favorite. There's a picture of someone with trench foot because that's the problem when your water sticks in or the feet getting stuck in the water for so long. It's gross, I know. It's during this time too, by the way, you have the famous Christmas truce, where for one day the German, British, and some other soldiers did not fight each other, and they actually greeted each other, and they had a Christmas celebration. But then the next day they were back to fighting, which is just it just demonstrates the tragedy. These men had so much in common. They spoke different languages, sure, but you know what? They both had Christmas carols. They honored their dead together. This war is just very sad, and it was going nowhere. All right. So we're going to look at the rest of the war later. I'm not going to go over all the aspects of the war. But here's what I'm going to have you. Well, I will give you information later, but you'll see this question up here. You're going to do a little bit of writing with it. I'll provide more information on that later. But I wanted to at least go over the beginning of the war today, kind of skipping through some of these. We're not going to go through all of them. Just so you can see the fact that the war was fought in other parts like the Middle East, etc. Middle East, and also, like I said, colonial wars, like the colonies that were under control, fighting in Africa and Asia. But the World War I starts off in a tragic way, and it's going to remain tragic throughout much of the war. It is a tragedy through all the way to the end. Hope guys find this lecture interesting. There will be some questions for you to answer, and I'll have some more information for you later. All right, guys, blessings to you. Bye-bye.